In 1946, 5 men grabbed a Chicago lottery king off the street and held him for a $100,000 ransom. His brothers paid it. He still cleared $25 million that year. A UPS worker who never earned more than $14,000 a year quietly turned one paycheck deduction into $70 million. Nobody at his funeral knew. A Harlem numbers banker built her fortune on nickel bets, refused to hand a cent to the mob, and ran her business in plain sight until the day she died. One trick on this list got a bootlegger written into the Great Gatsby. Another got outlawed by a mayor who smashed the machines with a sledgehammer on the steps of City Hall. None of these 18 tricks were secrets. They were common knowledge. Your grandparents just called them something else. The portable restroom rental market is worth over $20 billion today, projected to reach close to $35 billion by 2030, according to Grandview Research. Every construction site needs one. Every fair, every festival, every wedding in a field needs one. Nobody wants to own one. The trick was never the toilet. It was buying the thing everyone needs and nobody will compete for. You do not sell anything. You rent out something people would rather not think about, clean it on a schedule, and collect. Disgust is a moat. Nobody has ever tried to steal this market. The math has not changed. Pest control is a $22 billion industry headed toward $34 billion by 2030. Nobody sells this business away. Once a restaurant, a hotel, or an apartment building signs a monthly contract, that contract renews itself. No manager wants a health inspector finding a cockroach on the wrong day. The trick was never the spray. It was the fear of an inspection nobody controls the timing of. When the client needs you more than you need the client, you stop negotiating. You just get paid. Your grandfather's exterminator never had to ask twice. A well-placed private ATM nets between $1,000 and $3,000 a month, and you never touch the customer. You do not sell anything. You solve an invisible problem: the bar, the laundromat, the late-night market that has cash-only customers and no bank inside. You show up with a machine, keep it stocked, and charge for the convenience of being first. Somebody is always short on cash at 11 at night. Somebody has always been willing to pay a fee not to think about it. At its peak in the 1960s, roughly 80% of American households collected S&H Green Stamps. Retailers paid for the stamps, handed them out per purchase, and customers pasted them into books to trade for toasters and bicycles at nearly 800 redemption centers nationwide. The trick was never the free gift. It was getting paid to track how loyal a customer was, decades before anyone called it data. Discount chains like Kmart and Target broke the model in the 1970s by just cutting prices instead. By the late 80s, fewer than 100 retailers still bothered. Your credit card's cashback program is the same stamp book. It just does not need glue anymore. 2 of the tricks left on this list never got killed at all. They just never needed to change. The laundromat industry generates close to $7 billion a year in the United States, with margins up to 35%, and 95% of laundromats are still open 5 years after opening. Nobody has ever disrupted a laundromat. The trick was never the machines. It was installing plumbing nobody else wanted to deal with, in a building nobody else wanted to buy. Your grandmother did not own a washing machine. She owned quarters, a folding table, and 45 minutes to herself. Nobody digitized that. Nobody needed to. In the year 2000, American newspapers made $19.6 billion a year from classified ads. People called in, dictated 3 lines about a couch or an apartment, and paid $10 or $20 for it. By 2012, that number had dropped 77%. A computer programmer in San Francisco built a free listing site for his friends in 1995. It grew. Nobody at the newspaper saw it as competition because nobody thought a hobby could replace a monopoly. The trick was never the ad. It was owning the only phone number in town people called to sell a couch. Facebook Marketplace runs the exact same trick. It just does not need a phone. So far, every trick on this list is still legal, still boring, and still running exactly the way it always has. The next few were not so lucky. Somebody found a way to make more money by shutting them down than by letting them keep working. Watch how fast the language changes once real money shows up. Gambling device, unlicensed, a threat to the neighborhood. Somebody always finds a legal word for "I want in." By 2015, 4 years after Verizon walked away from payphones entirely, 1,100 independent operators were still pulling $286 million a year from the machines the big carriers left behind, according to FCC data. The trick was never the phone call. It was owning the box on the corner, in the hospital hallway, at the border crossing, where a phone call was the only option a person had. AT&T, Sprint, and Verizon all left once the margins got thin for a company their size. The margins stayed exactly the same size for everybody else. Your grandfather did not need a signal. He needed a quarter and a working dial tone. In 1946, a Wurlitzer jukebox cost about $1,000, and an operator could place a few hundred of them across a territory, splitting the take with every bar owner on the route. By the mid-1950s, Chicago mobster Jake Guzik controlled 100,000 of the country's 500,000 jukeboxes and pulled in several million dollars a year. The trick was never the music. It was owning a cash box nobody could audit. Every coin that went in was a coin nobody had to report. The mob did not invent the jukebox route. They just noticed nobody was counting. Streaming royalties run on the same unaudited math today. The names on the checks just changed. The next route business did not get infiltrated by the mob. It got outlawed by the mayor. In January of 1942, New York City Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia declared pinball a gambling device and sent police to smash confiscated machines with sledgehammers on the steps of City Hall. Chicago, Los Angeles, New Orleans, and dozens of smaller cities followed. The ban lasted in New York for 34 years. The trick was never the game. It was a machine that paid you back, which made it legally a slot machine with better lighting. In 1976, a 26-year-old magazine editor named Roger Sharp stood in front of city officials, called his shot on a real machine, and sank it, proving skill, not luck, decided the outcome. The ban was lifted that day. Every arcade redemption game running today exists because a stranger made one shot. Fuller Brush salesmen worked on commission, 30 to 50% of every sale, and by the company's own count, its best salesmen were clearing $50,000 a year, about $110,000 today. The technique was simple. Offer a free vegetable brush, and if the housewife hesitated, wash the baby, sweep the porch, do anything that proved the product worked before asking for money. The trick was never the brush. It was the doorstep conversation nobody else was willing to have. Supermarkets eventually put the same brush on a pegboard for less than the conversation cost. Then the internet finished the job. Solar salesmen still knock on the same doors today. They just do not wash your kids. The next two names on this list are not men. They are two of the boldest bets on the entire list. In 1925, Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound reported $4 million in gross income, roughly $55 million today, decades after the woman on the label had died. Pinkham put her own face on the bottle when nobody trusted a company to tell the truth about women's health. The trick was never the compound. It was trust, bottled and mailed to every drugstore in the country. In 1906, the federal government created the FDA and started requiring companies to disclose what was actually inside the bottle. The patent medicine industry could not survive being read out loud. The wellness industry selling you a founder's face on a label today runs on the exact same trust. The label just says supplement instead of compound. In 1926, nightclub hostess Texas Guinan earned $700,000 in 10 months greeting every customer with "Hello, sucker," getting raided by police, and reopening under a new name a few blocks away within days. The trick was never the liquor. It was turning her own arrest record into the advertisement. This is the one system on this list that nobody killed. In 1933, the 21st Amendment made alcohol legal again, and the entire business, the thrill of getting away with something, disappeared the moment permission arrived. The product did not stop working. The law just agreed with her. Here is something the pattern does not show yet. Every trick so far made somebody rich by staying just under the radar. The next few made somebody rich enough that the radar found them anyway. Once the money gets big enough, somebody with a badge, a briefcase, or a gun always shows up asking for a cut. In one quarter of 1921 alone, bootlegger George Remus deposited the equivalent of $33 million in today's money. He used his pharmacist's license to legally buy up warehouses of pre-prohibition medicinal alcohol, then had his own truck steal it on the way to his own distribution network. The trick was never the whiskey. It was owning both ends of the theft and calling the middle a loophole. At his peak, he ran operations across 9 states with 3,000 people on payroll. The Volstead Act created the gap he walked through. When federal agents finally closed it, the men who took over his territory were not lawyers. They were the kind of men Remus had spent a career trying not to become. At his peak in the late 1920s, Harlem's Casper Holstein pulled in an estimated $12,000 a day, running an illegal lottery he built on a number nobody could rig. The last 3 digits of the daily New York Stock Exchange clearing totals, printed in the paper every morning for anyone to check. The trick was never luck. It was sourcing the winning number from a place more honest than the game itself. In 1928, 5 men working for Dutch Schultz kidnapped Holstein and held him for ransom. He survived. His business did not for long. The state eventually legalized the lottery and ran the numbers game itself. Your state's lottery ticket runs on Holstein's idea. It just added a logo. Holstein was not the only Harlem banker Dutch Schultz tried to take by force. The next one said, no. Stephanie St. Clair ran her own Harlem Numbers Bank starting in 1923, employing 40 to 50 runners and earning about $200,000 a year, a personal fortune of $500,000 by 1930, worth roughly $8 million today. When Dutch Schultz tried to muscle into her territory, she refused to hand over a cent, took out newspaper ads warning the community about police corruption, and kept operating in plain sight. The trick was never running the numbers. It was refusing to be quiet about it. Your grandmother ran what amounted to a small investment firm out of Harlem. She just called it Policy because the banks would not let her open an account. Edward, George, and McKissick Jones started their policy operation out of the back door of their own tailor shop on Chicago's South Side. By 1946, it was worth $25 million a year. And the brothers had opened the Jones Brothers Ben Franklin store, the only black-owned department store of its kind in the country at the time. The trick was never the numbers game. It was reinvesting the winnings into a storefront nobody could raid. That same year, Sam Giancana's crew kidnapped Ed Jones and demanded $100,000 and a share of the business. His partner paid the ransom. Ed refused to give up the rest. The brothers left for Mexico rather than hand it over. Illinois eventually built its own state lottery on the same math the Jones brothers had already proven worked. Every empire on this list eventually paid somebody with a badge, a briefcase, or a gun. The last two never had to pay anyone at all. In 1935, a secretary named Grace Groner bought 3 shares of her employer's stock for a total of $180. She never sold one. She worked the same desk at Abbott Laboratories for 43 years, bought her clothes at rummage sales, never owned a car, and lived in a 1-bedroom cottage. When she died in 2010 at 100 years old, that $180 bet was worth $7.2 million. The trick was never picking the stock. It was never touching it again. Your grandmother did this for $180. You have an employer stock plan sitting in an email you have never opened. Theodore Johnson never earned more than $14,000 a year working for UPS. When a mentor told him to save 20% of every paycheck, he protested that he could not live on 20% less. His mentor told him to think of it as a tax, money he would never see, so he would never miss it. Johnson had it automatically deducted before he could talk himself out of it. He retired in 1952 with $700,000 in company stock. He never sold a share. When he died decades later, it was worth $70 million. The trick was never the stock pick. It was making the discipline involuntary, before willpower ever got a vote. None of these 18 tricks required a genius idea. They required someone willing to do the boring version of something everyone else wanted to skip. Own the toilet, hold the stock, answer the phone that mattered. Pick one from this list. Not the illegal ones. Pick the automatic deduction, the stock plan, the contract nobody wants to chase. Set it up this week. Then come back in a year and tell your grandparents they were right.